Let's move on to the next item on page 27, item 9, Resource Management Act delegations.
If you want. Thank you, Chair. I'm going to talk to the paper this morning. Malcolm Miller's not here today. Also going to run through a bit of a presentation that perhaps expands the paper out a little bit and invites a little bit more discussion. As the paper notes, it was sparked by Councillor Bevan's desire to have a look at the delegations to see whether Council could or should be more involved in, particularly, as I understood it, notification requirements around water bottling consents. And the paper is reasonably starchy and takes you through RMA process and details to you how we conduct our notification decision making, how consents are processed, the relevant parts of the legislation that are at play when we're considering notification or not, and talks about delegations and looks at issues and ways forward. Now, the paper is very much focused on the delegations, but hadn't gone any broader than that, but the presentation's going to. And I guess that the paper leads us to, or from a staff perspective, gets us to a point of saying, well, albeit that Council may well call in the delegations, there are some risks to Council in doing that, and that irrespective of who is making the decision, proper process must be followed, and if proper process is followed, we don't see that any other decisions are likely to come from these notification assessments than the ones that staff are making. And there is a risk to the organisation that if you make the process a political one rather than a process one, that the Council's liable to litigation on the part of applicants or other parties. Now, I get that that's probably not the answer that people were looking for, and is probably not helping us move this issue forward, because it's very much focused on the delegations. But so I put together a presentation that on reflecting on this a little bit more, probably outlines an option that may change things a little bit, and that we're going to investigate going forward. So this slide just puts to you the issues, and none of this is news to you in terms of why we're talking about water bottling. There are concerns. There are various views around there around the issue in terms of the value add, the competition for existing users or new users, and questions around our understanding of the resource and therefore our ability to grant these consents. And I'll just make the point that the RMA is not a tool that's designed to quickly deal with issues like this that crop up, given that it's an effects-based piece of legislation that is intended to sustainably manage natural resources and to manage the effects of activities. Yes, sure.
I don't think there's a view that Council knows nothing about groundwater resource. I think that's a little bit of extremist. What there is there's a view that nobody really fully understands what's happening with groundwater.
Yeah, look, I'm just responding to the comments I've seen in social media and the media around our level of understanding, and look, you may be right
But that's a big mistake to respond to social media.
For sure, but I guess what this is saying is that there are a range of views. And
Did you hear that?
Surprising
that
regional
is not the
politician,
view with the general public.
Sure. You're right, it's probably an extreme view.
My wife told me it's a big mistake.
An extreme view that we know nothing. Perhaps the most relevant bit is that you know, the sustainably managing bit, those questions around our understanding and therefore our ability to manage sustainably. So all of these things are at play. They're at mix, they're in people's minds, and they're concerned about them. And it's just an acknowledgement of those. There are a range of solutions that are before us, and we've just talked about TENC. In our view, that's the right place to have these discussions and resolve these sorts of things, because coming out of TENC, there's going to be allocations for groundwater across Hiratonga where they don't exist now. And potentially there's going to be some prioritisation of those allocations, i.e. food and fibre production may come first in the queue if there's competition for the resource, i.e. if you're at or exceeding allocation, who do you give access to the water to first? So those sorts of discussions are live and are no doubt going to be realised in the policy that's going to come out of TENC, but it takes time. I do note there, however, though, that in a consenting environment we can give effect to notified policy as soon as it's notified. So as soon as Council has formed a view, or the Regional Planning Committee and Council, the consenting team can give effect to that. But the key point is that it takes time. We've talked about royalties for central government. I think you've heard a clear view from the Minister for the Environment that there's not an interest in that from central government. It's something this council may choose to pursue. That's certainly an option that's before it. But I guess I don't have a great deal of faith that that's going to get you anything quickly. The final point there is, and it's something that we've done in the past in response to questions around understanding of resources, we can say that given, if we're in an environment we know little about the resource and we're concerned about it, we can place a very high bar on applicants in terms of the information they're required to provide us to satisfy us of the effects of their activity. And we did this in the Ruataniwha catchment some years ago, in essence, particularly around groundwater, requiring consent holders to provide detailed groundwater modelling, which had the effect of slowing down applications, or in fact pretty much stalling them. However, we would need to be satisfied that there is an RMA requirement for that, and I can't tell you that there is at the moment. There is no evidence to tell us that there is an issue with the resource, and certainly we know plenty about it. And there is also the risk in this case that we're not focused on any activity, we would be focused on all activities with a similar effect, which would include general irrigation takes or industrial takes. So there are perverse outcomes potentially in those sorts of things. Notification, so it's in the papers, section 95, and I'm sure you've all read it in detail. It sets out the steps that council staff have to follow. Emphasise the main factor for us is determining effects on the environment. And I've highlighted there also special circumstances, and it's something I want to come back to shortly. Key considerations, effects, are they more than minor, and are there any special circumstances at play? And a notification assessment happens after we've received and accepted an application, i.e. we're satisfied it's got all the information we need to process it. The staff run through a notification assessment and make a determination on whether notification is required or not. And just note that there is a risk of litigation if council doesn't follow proper process, and that is a real risk. And the risk is one of judicial review, where a party can say, we think you've got that wrong, and take it to the High Court and have it challenged. And the process is not one of merit, it's not one of did you get it right technically, it is purely one of process. So that the court is interested in saying, did you follow proper process, did you consider all the information and evidence before you, did you ask the right questions in coming to your determination? It will not go and relitigate or review evidence, i.e. the model was wrong or the numbers were wrong or that the science was wrong. It simply reviews process. We're in the heart of that at the moment with Ruataniwha expanded land area and Greenpeace judicial review. And like I say, the review is not about whether there will or won't be an increase in any particular level of contaminant or modelling or anything else. It simply did council staff follow proper process. And just the final point there is judicial reviews typically for when council decides to non-notify consent. I can't think of any, and I couldn't find any in the case law that highlighted ones where consent was notified and somebody took a judicial review. So it's typically where disaffected parties or disenfranchised parties or people with concerns say you should have notified that and you didn't, and they'll take a judicial review. So special circumstances are something that's floated around a bit. So 95A sets out that council can decide whether special circumstances are at play with any particular application. I'd also make the point, though, that 95A also removed the presumption of notification. So previously the Act had a presumption of notification, now it has a presumption of non-notification. It typically says you should non-notify unless there are reasons to notify. It's that sort of language that's at play. Before you are special circumstances in terms of what it means. There's a definition in the third bullet point. Fourth bullet point highlights recent case law from the Port of Auckland Limited, where you'll recall the Bledisloe Wharf expansion was issued non-notified. It was taken through a judicial review by public interest groups. And of note, the court highlighted that significant public interest and controversy by the proposal might be considered to be part of a case for special circumstances. So it could be argued that special circumstances and public interest and controversy is at play around water bottling consents. And it's not something that we're prepared to make a judgment on, but we're going to seek advice on that to see whether whether that's real or not, what the thresholds are, what the tests are that may mean that council could or should be considering that special circumstances are at play in terms of any new consent or a change of conditions or a change of purpose for water bottling. So it's an area that we're going to explore and we'll bring back that advice to you in due course. Oh, sorry, do you want me to bring that back
On
up?
that last point, I guess instead of investing the money in a theoretical piece of advice on this, wouldn't we achieve the same goal and some others as well if, in fact, we required notification of a bottling consent under using the special circumstances argument and let that be challenged if someone wanted to challenge it, and we'd be resolving the issue very definitively, as opposed to just spending the money on somebody's review of case law just as a theoretical matter.
I guess that's a way you could approach it. My advice would be not to approach it that way.
Why?
That seems to be that you're wanting the courts to test a proposition that you could test yourself before you began. And I guess it comes back to my earlier comments around proper process. My advice to you as a bureaucrat, as I've been recently called, would be that the right thing to do would be to seek the advice and ensure that you understand all of the risks before you and whether you are following the right direction and doing the right thing before you took any positive action in terms of choosing to notify consent that otherwise that decision may well be overturned in the court. And look, I'm not seeing that being a great cost to council. It's not a huge amount of work that's required to do that. It's a further examination of case law and then some advice to us on whether this particular Port of Auckland case provides any opportunity for council to say, well, actually, special circumstances are at play. So that would be my advice to you.
So that's the end of the presentation. Are there any further questions? Councillor Balfour.
Yes, with respect to the tank process and the broader issue of allocations of water, this in the tank group, I can't recall in the tank meetings that we've yet actually explicitly talked about this. It's been sort of floating around the edges of the meeting from time to time. But from the standpoint of helping the public understand that we were attentive to the concerns involved here, would it make any sense to somehow advance a discussion of this in the tank world, to put it on the agenda, to have a discussion of it, to do our own bit of straw polling, if you will, as to what all the relevant interests are around that table, as you point out. who have different understandings, different things they're trying to achieve in that process. And it seems to me that if part of our concern here is establishing that this needs to be dealt with in a more holistic allocation process of setting priorities and so forth, that can we show some evidence that we're moving more quickly in that direction in the tank process?
So, Councillor, the notion of considering water bottling in a more holistic context is not just something we would recommend from an integrated management perspective. It's actually something we are required to do. We can't make any changes to the way in which water bottling is regulated through anything other than a plan change. So, and the only plan change that we have for the tank catchments is the tank plan change that we're in right now. With respect to your substantive question, the meeting on the 2nd of November of the tank group is going to have its first engagement around groundwater science, and the model, as you will be aware, is the surface groundwater model will be available for testing scenarios around allocation from about December through to the early part of next year. The work program then requires the tank group to consider how it's going to manage those different allocation limit scenarios, etc., including tools such as preferential allocation. So that is very much on the work program that is intended to come forward next year. I think probably the best we can do at this point in time is ensure that all of our communications about the tank group's work program, including the representations made about that by councillors in the public, is to affirm the fact that in the new year we will have the science available to support considering options around water allocation, water prioritisation from the aquifer. So that's very much on the table for next year. Our preference as staff would be to continue to tie that conversation to the science, the physical science and the evidence, as opposed to having an abstract conversation about the merits of water bottling now, because an awful lot of the abstract conversation that we've observed in the public domain in recent times has not been particularly well informed with respect to the physical realities of the resource.
Councillor Hewitt.
Thanks, James. What you're discussing is the integrity of the sites. I get that, but there is a public perception that needs more than just science to kind of fix our position. And I'm wondering where you're going with this with the comms team, Liz, because we've got a story to tell around what we can and cannot do, and it should be a really simple story, but it's just not getting across. And I see constantly a lot of finger pointing, regional council's fault. Well, actually, we are very constricted in what we can and cannot do. So how can we improve that message to the public?
So we've undertaken a piece of communications, I think it was about 12 months ago, that really tried to set up what we can and cannot do, and it's probably timely that we do it again. I mean, I think it's, if you can indulge me in a history lesson for just a minute. I mean, it's 25 years this year since the Resource Management Act came in. Prior to that, under the Town and Country and Planning Act, councils could be very prescriptive about what type of activity was allowed and was not allowed. In other words, they could pick winners and losers. The Resource Management Act is effects-based, and that was a deliberate decision done by both Parliament and those drafting it to look at a different way of resource management in New Zealand. One of the challenges is that, a whole generation on, you are getting away from this perspective of effects-based and trying to look at other elements of an activity that can be managed through, try to be managed through the Resource Management Act process, and it's not designed for that. So I think we need to just keep reiterating the message that we've given about the state of the aquifer, about the resource consenting process, and really what we are able to do and what we are unable to do, and that will include through future plan changes. I mean, there may well be expectations that we could somehow specify, water bottling as a specific activity differentiated from other types of water uses and water takes, and that will be a challenge. And so I think it's really, there is a fair bit of managing public expectations around it, but also putting it into context as well.
Can I just add to that it was actually about 4 months ago that we took out a double-page spread in all of the community newspapers, putting a whole range of information about how the aquifer is managed and the state of the aquifer. And in that, we made very clear that the current allocation to water bottling is 2.5% of overall allocated volume, the response we got from the community after putting that in the newspapers was very positive. In fact, we got a lot of feedback to say that had changed a lot of people's views about this issue. In the ensuing 4 months, a whole range of private actors and individuals have resuscitated the issue, not referring back to any of the facts or the evidence, but essentially a political narrative around the merits of that. So what that suggests to us, I think, is that we're going to have to just keep on repeating that information, and in the face of some actors that would like to make a political issue out of something which, from a resource management point of view, is not an issue at this point in time that can be demonstrated certainly by the science. So we may choose to run the double-page spread again. I have to say, over the last month or so, we've given some thought to that, given the amount of comment around water bottling. However, in the face of an election campaign, council staff choosing to take out a double-page spread, putting information about the aquifer, as absolutely objective as that may be, may have been interpreted as trying to influence a political narrative. So we've taken a decision just to be quiet about it for now, but perhaps after the election's an opportunity for us to reinvigorate that.
Symposium.
So Councillor Balfour had a follow-up to that?
It seems to me we are, though, sending conflicting message here that sort of sets a trap for us. On the one hand, you guys are very, 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 very declarative that there is no problem here. We have water out the wazoo. We could have a zillion water bottling consents and have no reason to deny any of them because we have limitless amounts of water in this aquifer. But on the other hand, we're also telling the world that we are engaged in this very meticulous scientific process of modeling, and which the verdict is out on, presumably, because we're yet to bring it forward, yet to bring it forward, yet to bring it forward. So on the one hand, we're saying we don't have the answer.
So the question
yet,
is?
and on the other hand, we are saying we absolutely do. So how do we distinguish here? And are we prepared today, for example, to just go on record saying we have absolutely no problem servicing an unlimited number of water bottling consents on the Haratunga Plains? Is that our position?
So there's a couple of elements to your comments. One is, first of all, there's monitoring state and trends, and then the other is the science to inform policy and allocation settings. So they're two quite different things. What we're not seeing in the aquifer is widespread overall declines in the resource to the point we're saying there is an issue, flashing lights on the dashboard, pull up, you're going to hit a mountain. So there are no indicators to say that continued allocation of groundwater, and I'm particularly referring to the confined parts of the aquifer where most of the new allocations are occurring, or where these changes of conditions are coming in, to say that we should stop issuing water or allowing water to be used. We know that further up into the catchment and the semi-confined and the unconfined parts of the resource that there are issues, and there are albeit not set in policy, but nonetheless allocations and limits at play that are constraining use of the resource in those areas, reflecting the effects of those activities on nearby surface water bodies. So what the science is going to do is it's going to allow James and the team to figure out a range of scenarios around allocations. It's going to look at the confined part of the aquifer and say, if we were concerned about intrusion of the sea under the ground, what's a limit around allocation that you would set to avoid that happening in the future? Because at the moment we're seeing no evidence of it occurring, but we don't want to issue water up to the point where that could start happening. So you could set those sorts of allocations. It'll also then give a more prescriptive and more defined relationship in the semi-confined and unconfined parts of the aquifer to allocations of groundwater to surface water flows, and will also then inform rates of take and overall volumes and where those minimum flows might be set. So it gives you those nuances or the fine-tuning, if you like, of the policy that doesn't exist now. So we're not seeing anywhere in our information or in our dashboard, that is the groundwater dashboard, red lights flashing saying temperature high, oil low sort of thing. It's saying systems are working as expected and as anticipated given the type of activity you're doing. So there are no warnings, notwithstanding that you want to set your policy up to avoid future scenarios where you may well have an enormous amount more water sought for bottling or any other purpose that you want to be able to manage within a sustainable framework to ensure the integrity of the resource going forward. So there are two quite distinct parts to it, I think, that are, suggesting that what we're doing at the moment isn't militating an immediate change.
Just to be really, really clear,
Have
we
I got
are
a
not
question,
saying
Chair?
that there
Chair?
is an
Chair, have I got a
unlimited
question?
resource that can be expended ad infinitum.
Right.
Absolutely not. It's a finite resource, there's no question about that, but the level of abstraction relative to the overall resource is relatively small for water bottling.
Yeah.
And could we sustain a 100-fold increase in water bottling in this region? Probably not, but A, we haven't seen that level of demand. B, we don't think that demand exists in the global water bottling market anyway, given all the other places where water is abstracted from and the size of that market, which we've previously provided advice to councillors on. And C, in the absence of any of that obvious demand, there's no view at the moment that the current allocations are causing any significant adverse effect. So I just don't want our advice to be on that misunderstood or mischaracterised at all.
Councillor Barker.
Can I just make a comment here?
In the form of a question, of course you can, Councillor Barker, otherwise we'll wait till the end.
No, the thing is that, just a point of order then, just want to make the observation that councillors wait until you identify them before they speak, and staff come in and speak as and when they wish to. So I'm just saying to you, whose meeting is this? I just want you to
Well, it's
direct
my
yourself.
meeting, councillor, and
Yeah.
if you wish to go by the book, I'll go by the book.
I want
Absolutely.
I want you to go by the book.
No, you don't.
Please.
I tell you what, you don't.
I will. I'll read the book thoroughly. This first question is to Ian, and it's simply about the volume of water in the aquifer. Is it correct that the science we have so far shows that the level of the aquifer is in a steadily declining state, i.e., from my memory, at least a metre down on average over previous years? The second question I have to you is that from the presentation you've made here today, there is a distinct change in tone from the paper that you sent out. And I'd like you to tell me what caused the change in the tone.
So just in responding to the aquifer level, I think the groundwater quantity report came to you about 6 months ago, I think, from memory. And what that was showing is that there is an increasing, if you like, amplitude. If you imagine a wave, so groundwater levels are declining further in the summer than they have in the past, but they're recovering again in the winter with recharge. So we're seeing a greater, the lows, if you like, are getting lower in parts of the aquifer. That's in the upper part, in the unconfined and potentially the semi-confined. So the lows are getting lower up there. Out towards the coast here in the confined part of the aquifer, there's one record that we have somewhere in Miani, I think, nearly 100 years of record that have shown no change in level to the resource out here. Further up, as a result of abstraction, and there's no doubt that it's a result of abstraction, and potentially a little bit of climate change mixed in there as well, is the summer lows, the groundwater levels in summer are getting much lower, and that's the graph you've seen is showing that they are steadily getting lower. So what we're wanting to do, in the relevance or importance of that is that the lower they get, the more effect they have on nearby surface water bodies. the Ngāraroa River, the Paoratua, the Kārewarewa streams, those sorts of areas. So we want to be able to set limits around abstraction to avoid, the lows, the summer lows getting so low they're impacting the resource. So that's, hopefully that answers the first question. The second question, yes, there has been a change in focus and sort of approach, because the paper that I had prepared was just purely focused on the delegations. And in correspondence with Councillor Bevan, he pointed out that he wanted a broader discussion around this. So I said, well, and I was hoping he was going to be here today. I said, well, the presentation will expand the content out a bit, because there are other things that could be considered and that are at play here. So I had potentially misunderstood what he was looking for in the paper. I thought it was purely about the delegations, and my advice to you is pretty clear in that there are risks in tinkering with the delegations, but there are other options before council potentially.
Mr. Chairman, when you're finished with questions, I have a proposal to amend the recommendations on the basis that, as it stands, 1 and 2 really stops the matter going any further forward, and I would want to add a 3 that was in effect a recommendation to the incoming council to further consider water allocation priorities and processes through policy development, which is what you're intending to do in any case. But in terms of a conclusion to this item, it does mean that there is a way forward recorded. And if you like, I'll put that now.
I'm happy with that, unless there's further questions.
I guess I'm inclined to offer a additional item on the recommendation with respect to the proposition that was floated earlier about seeking the further legal advice on using the special circumstance option as a basis of requiring notification. So would I offer that as an amendment to this?
No, I'm not going to take it.
Okay, look, we'll get to the recommendation shortly. Are there any further questions on the paper? 1 and 3 years, gratefully received, Councillor Barker.
No, I've made many helpful suggestions to you. Many helpful suggestions. I'll record them for you. But it seems to me that I've also got an amendment here that I'd like to move. And I would have thought you can do this by having the formal process. So I just think it would be helpful to have, if people have some ideas, stick them all on the table, have a bit of a discussion about them, and then at the point you'll get, I think, rather than go move secular.
So 2 minutes ago you wanted me to go to full standing orders. It is a Wednesday. It is a Wednesday. Look, let's we'll start with Councillor Dick. If there's a further amendment, we'll work our way through it.
Okay. Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman.
You wish to move the motion with an addition?
Yeah,
which reads simply,
1 and 2 amended to state agrees to retain at present the current delegations to Hawke's Bay Regional Council staff, etc. And then a 3 that council recommends the incoming council that it further considers water allocation priorities and processes through policy development.
Someone happy to second that?
Yeah, I really do.
You're happy to second that? Okay, wish to speak.
Well, I mean, the paper's very useful, but we need to go forward on this, and it's appreciated that it will be part of the tank process. But I would have thought with a new council coming in, and undoubtedly some new members, that a process, either through workshops or whatever, could be set up fairly early in the piece to discuss these issues, because they are in the public's mind, and perception is reality. The reality, in fact, at the moment is that there are about 60 containers a month going out through Port of Napier, which is just a very, very small quantity. The Awatoto plant comes on stream soon, but what volumes they put out at the end of the day will be determined by what the market will accept. And there is this view that you get it for free and you sell it for millions. Well, that's not the reality at all. In fact, water bottling business is a hard business and it's hard to make money out of. But we have to recognise public perceptions and move along, and that the effect of the resolution I'm proposing would do just that.
Thank you. Seconder, you wish to speak?
Thank you, and Liz, thanks to your team for bringing this paper to us. I take on board that you're full up with the flu by the sounds of it, Ian, and hopefully you're not passing it around the room to all of us, but I think you should go home in the utmost of kindness. It's turned into a political debate, but the heart and soul of this is, do we leave the delegations as they are? And I absolutely think that we should. As a member of the Hearings Committee panel, I don't want to be called in with a 2-hour drive to be doing what in effect is staff work. I think that the rules and regulations are there, and they should stay there. And with regard to the wider debate, I mean, it's clear that you're working incredibly hard on allocations based on informed science, and I think it's been helpful that we've had a little bit of a discussion on how we are telling our story more effectively through the community, because we've heard from Councillor Dick that we have the potential for more volumes of water going through our port, of which we all benefit, and the nuts and bolts of water storage, whether we're drawing water out of the ground to export in an apple or a water bottle, that if that water's not being used and not being exploited, then it is simply a waste of a resource. So I think that we have a wider discussion here, an opportunity to be informing the community far more than it's currently been done. So I'm pleased to support the heart and soul of the recommendation that we continue with the policy development and that we maintain the current delegations as they are. Thank you.
So I have a further amendment to offer. And the wording of it is, I have no objection to that provision. I would add further, I guess then, a number 4. Instruct staff to seek legal advice, weigh the efficacy of using the special circumstances provision to require notification of bottling consents.
Seconder for that? Yeah, but a second that wish to speak.
Well, I just think that there's a perception that our hands are tied here in the face of something that, whether we like it or not, has stirred up a lot of controversy. And this discussion today is focused really on only the first half of that controversy, which is, do we have a grip on the resource and the sustainability of awarding these consents and so forth. I think if we have an opportunity to show that we would like to put some brake on the process, that this particular avenue as a basis of notifying these consents is worth pursuing. And if it turns out that it is a legitimate basis for notification, then I think we should then move to implement that as part of our process. I think there's a second stage, which I would comment on, but not try to engage really today, that has to do with the notion that we're giving away water without returning any value to the community. And I do think that the next council will need to address what it wants to say about that in its advocacy role. And knowing that the government is not inclined to move in this direction, nor is the government inclined to ban GMOs. There's a lot of things the government isn't inclined to do, which shouldn't really matter as to what our position here as a council is on these issues. And in this case, the community wants to see some return from this activity, and I think it'll be incumbent on the next council to be looking at more seriously, is there a way to accomplish that or not, and do we want to adopt that kind of advocacy position or not? But that's for the next council to do. Right now, I would just like to deal with showing some sensitivity to more public, a more precautionary approach, if you will. And I think having this advice at least puts us on a path where we can say we are trying to untie our hands on this matter.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with everything Councillor Balford has said. The community is expecting us to do something about this. And life is political, whether we like it or not. And I actually appreciate Mr. Palmer not putting that ad in, because that would have been a very silly thing to do during an election. You cannot convince a mother in Havelock North with 3 sick kids because they've drunk faulty, poisonous water that it's okay that 2 kilometres away we are pumping water off to some foreign shore. You cannot convince the fruit growers of Twyford, if we have a drought, that they've got to stop watering their trees whilst 2 kilometres in the other direction, because the big bottling plant is between those two protagonists, that's okay. You will not be able to sell this. I said so 6 months ago, I'm saying so now, and it is clear that the community just will not accept this. So we need to do something, and we need to do something, we seem to be doing something, and in reality, we actually do need to do something, because this will just be a blot on our landscape and will come up time and time again and hit the next council. So let's do something positive, and this suggestion is exactly that. It's a beginning.
Thank you. Further speakers to that? The amendment, yes. No, there was no amendment. It was an original motion, and now there's an amendment to it.
Thank you. I will vote for both. I feel that they don't go far enough, though. In my view, I think we should stake out where the ground is. And I do want to thank Ian for the change in his presentation. When I read the original paper, I was slightly grumpy with it, actually, to be frank with you, because I didn't think you were giving us the advice that I thought Peter had sought. Yes, it's free and frank advice should be given, and if you disagree with what people are wanting to do, you should say so clearly. But you should also, a report should also say, if they choose to do this, this is the path to do it. But we don't agree with it for these reasons. You with me? I didn't get that. And the clear thing that was being sought here was for there to be some influence over the process of resource consents for water bottling. Now, there are all sorts of reasons why we should do nothing, but in these things, this is where politics meets the administration of the law. And I think what we need here is a clear outline of what the demonstration of the law says, and you've given us that. But what we haven't got is the politics of the situation. And the politics of it is that the public are very concerned about this. And they're concerned about it not because they necessarily see that the aquifer is going to be completely depleted, but what they see is that resource consents are applied for and given automatically. No one knows, no one sees. And they don't get a sense that anybody knows what the end point of this is. It's just a process, we do this because we are thinking. And I think they want to have some scrutiny on it. So the obligation of this council is to reflect in some way where the public mood is at, not just to administer it. And I feel personally that having resource consents for water bottling to be notified, so people see them, are notified, is a very good start. Now, it could be that we could be putting ourselves in the position of being exposed to someone litigating against us in the High Court because we haven't followed the due process. Well, that's something we should be able to take, and stare down, in my view. There's nothing wrong with staring things down. It might not be the right thing to do, but we as a council have an obligation to represent the views and the concerns of the people who elect us. On the other side, I'd come back to the point that I made by way of question, is that the information we have is that in many parts of our aquifer, the levels are declining gradually over time. Now, this is a pipeline. No one knows what the end effect of this is going to be for certainty. So I think it's entirely reasonable that this council apply the precautionary principle. We're going to be cautious here. And part of being cautious is to say these things need to be notified and we need to take them into account. Now, after having examined all the science at the time the application comes forward in a notified process, we might say that we agree with that. By having a clear outline process, going through it thoroughly, I'm sure we will then work to assuage public concern. But at the moment, the public see this just as happening as a matter of course. And they see the water disappearing and they're concerned about the quality and the nature of it. So I'll support both, but I think we should have gone further today.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Pike.
I'm not surprised that the three speakers who've spoken before me are actually going to support this. I can't. Sometimes I wonder when I sit here around the table whether people are actually listening to what is being said to us by the experts, by the staff who we pay. To say that the levels of the aquifer are steadily declining, we've just heard actually that that is not the case, that it actually recharges. It is political, as my the speakers before me said. It is political, and they are making political, taking political advantage of it. To say, as Councillor Belford just said before, a zillion water consents, come on. By saying those sort of things, you're just stirring the pot, and it is not the case. We are taking a measured response here at the council. We are using science to back up the policy. We are working through policy through TANK at the present time. That is underway. To say that, to call for another legal response when only in the previous items there were questions about the costs of legal costs. I mean, come on. I can't understand it sometimes, but I think that the way that this particular item, the recommendation, and particularly I think the recommendation of Councillor Dick is the right way to go forward. Policy is being developed. Let's work on that basis.
Thank you, Councillor. I think you're the only one that hasn't spoken, Councillor Scott.
I will speak, but I'm not going to speak now because we're only voting on the
You wish to speak to
amendment.
the...
I wish to speak to the substantive.
Okay, so you wish to sum up. So I'll put the motion in. All those in favour, please say aye. Just the amendment.
Just number 4.
Just number 4, yeah. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, no. Hang on, and hands up then. In favour. Just 4,
Yes.
yeah. Yeah, no. And against. The amendment becomes part of the substantive motion. You wish to speak to the substantive motion?
Substantive, Mr Chairman, and I'm happy to include number 4 for the sole reason the staff already indicated this is what they intend doing. So it makes sense to go down this path, and I wish to speak to the whole motion. There is no decline in the aquifer. There is a decline in the summer levels of the aquifer. There is no evidence that we are mining this aquifer. Through the tank process, there is a groundwater model being developed that will help us better understand both the interaction between groundwater and surface water and the limits on the groundwater and the effects of those takes on surface water. That is what we need in order to establish limits on groundwater takes. And I believe through the tank process, we will actually get those limits, and then that gives more certainty around where we are with being able to let any groundwater takes in the future. And I think that that's a very important body of work to be done as soon as possible. There is a public perception out there quite clearly established, and we saw it in a talking point only last week, that is stating that we don't know what goes on with this aquifer. We know a tremendous amount about this aquifer, but we're continuing to seek more knowledge about it and get a better understanding of it, which is good science. Why this public perception has occurred is through the deliberate undermining of the information that comes out of this council. which brings us to the communication and the important part of continuing to tell the story of what we're doing and where we are. And I totally appreciate the council's staff's concern about not being seen to be taking any particular point during an election period about this. However, it does need to be told over and over again, because the public actually need to be informed, not misinformed that they are. And I'm appalled to hear that there is a connection now between water for bottling plants and what's happened in Havelock North, or what happened to the growers. We know, and the staff have explained this a number of times, and there has been communication out there, that we're talking about different parts of the aquifer. We're talking about the confined aquifer and the unconfined aquifer. And we just need everybody, this council and the public, to understand how this works and what it is. There's been an awful lot said about taking a political stand on this and acting politically. Mr. Chairman, the RMA is effects-based on the environment, not on political grandstanding. To suddenly go out there and face a judicial review on the grounds that will make the public feel good is not the right way to go. That's why I support, yes, that we will act by getting good information, because should there be a judicial review called, the staff can be seen to be showing best practice rather than a really slipshod method of going straight out there and testing the case without any facts to support you. It ends up being a difference of being able to recover your costs or being a cost directly on the ratepayer, and I don't think political statements should be a cost on the ratepayer. We come back to the substantive part of this paper, which is the delegation to staff, and that's where it should lie. We have experts in this field on planning and on consent knowledge, and a really thorough understanding of the RMA. To try and make this a political decision would be totally and utterly wrong, and would lead to it being contested over and over again. So I support, not just at present, but I support the retained staff delegations. Informed by the latest knowledge of case law, yes, but it still must remain with them that we actually do our duty according to the RMA. And when it comes to the community expectation, Mr. Chairman, no matter what public perception is there, if it goes to a full hearing, it still will be decided at whatever level, whether it's by a hearing of council, whether it's by the Environment Court, by the Court of Appeal, that it will be decided on the effects, not the weight of public opinion. That is the RMA. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Excuse me. Wish to sum up? I think we've heard it all. I'll put the motion, and all those in favour, please say aye. And against? Carried. Thank you. Morning tea time, everyone.